everyone. You're listening to Castbitten, a Dungeon Synth podcast. I'm the co-host, Reed.
And I'm your other co-host, Elyvilon.
Were you expecting Trev? Or not? Today we've got Trev from Cursebitten on the horn. Cursebitten is a Dungeon Synth project, but you probably also know him as the usual host of this wonderful podcast. Today, Elyvilon and I will be talking to Trev about his newest album, Northwarder, as well as the podcast itself.
You just heard Cursebitten's track from the new album, Murkavi. I love the way there are these really beautiful bell tones working through the track that at the end kind of disintegrate into nothingness with heavy delay and reverb. It's I feel like a new direction for Cursebitten, and something that's really interesting and I don't know, a great example of the way new textures are used on this new album. So anyways, Trev, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. Thanks for the lovely intro. And Tristan, you know that I'm a texture guy, so thanks for pointing that out. That always feels lovely.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you were a texture guy in the first album, and after listening probably 5 or 6 times to the new album, I can really tell you've turned texture up to the limit. I feel like it's really incredible. All of the different, tones and like even non-melodic elements you're bringing into the new album, just with like hissing and like gritty choirs and pads and things. It's really impressive. And going into this new album, what were some of the overarching themes, whether they were like musical or artistic? And like, were you using textures intentionally to achieve those?
Oh yeah, there's a ton of intentionality and thought going into it. I guess maybe it makes sense, as you were talking about sound and textures and things like that, to talk a little bit more about the mechanical aspects. You mentioned a lot of gritty textures, gritty choirs, and also kind of spacey, very reverb heavy things. With this, one idea going into it was to kind of have a higher level of, I guess, consistency and more intentional choices than the first album. I wrote the first album very casually. It was at first just playing around on Reaper, the new PC, trying to see what I could do, and then making songs for friends, and ended up becoming an album. Whereas this, from the start, I knew that I was making the next Cursebitten project. So especially for the fans, we kind of didn't get into it last time, but Elyvilon and I found out that we at the time lived in the same city when we were setting up our interview. So we met up to talk about music for a little bit and kind of had the idea of pooling together instruments that we intend to use for a whole project. And that's something that I was much more particular about for this one. So yeah, at the very start, I kind of told myself like my bread and butter VSTs, and then picked out a few voices that I thought were very interesting but hadn't written music with yet, and kind of stuck with those. And I wanted those to pop up throughout the album, almost like I was kind of picturing the album like a play with a bunch of different actors playing different characters. But no, in an old timey play, someone puts on a wig, someone puts on a new outfit. It's maybe the same person in different scenes and different characters, the same actor the whole time. And that's how I wanted a lot of the sounds to be. So a lot of those like heavily distorted chorus sounds is a big one. I made those by like really saturating like a very clean choir with like a mastering tool designed to add like a really heavy spacious kind of gain to it. And yeah, I kind of just clung to some of those more aggressive sounds and then found some lighter sounds that complemented it. And as I found the way that they interact, like I said, I pulled them together to try to use them consistently throughout the project. Yeah, I think that maybe covers part of that question there, at least.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd say the new album is very thematically consistent, a lot more so than Seize It was. It's one thing I really liked about the new album. You brought up a little bit about you and Elyvilon talking after the podcast, and that actually leads into a really good question that I had. Has running the podcast had any influence on your music? I know a big difference between this album and Seize It is that you've been running a podcast in between them. and I wondered if like talking to other artists and how they do their craft had like an impact on what you do when you make music.
Oh yeah, I'm so happy you said that. The answer is absolutely yes. And to be honest, the whole point of the podcast is just an excuse for me to talk to musicians that I like and get them boxed up in a room, and I can make them tell me how they make their wonderful music. So I don't take that lightly. I'm mentally taking notes and trying to capture all these takeaways from the interviews, and I'm trying to be a good interviewer and put on a good show, but I'm also selfishly asking things that I want to know, and fortunately, the fans also want to know that often. But yeah, I'm going into the interviews trying to become a better musician, and that's totally influenced the new album. Stuff like talking with Elyvilon, as well as like some of the more recent ones. Getting a little bit more into like percussion and different styles and genres within Dungeon Synth, and I don't know. The whole time, I guess, like I said, I've been mentally taking notes of things that I find interesting and maybe mysterious when I'm listening to music, and then how the artists do them, and I really do try to let that. And then maybe in a kind of grander sense, it's sometimes humbling to be around musicians that I really respect and to care so much for their music, and then listen to them talk about how they make it and about the care and attention that they put into it. And I mentioned that the first album was more of a casual affair that I threw together. Being exposed to musicians taking the genre seriously encourages me to take it more seriously as well, and try to really just put out the best that I could put out.
That makes a lot of sense. And you talked a little bit about the percussion, about learning about that through the podcast. You can definitely hear a lot more percussion in this album. It's like a lot more noticeable than it was in Caesar, I'd say.
Oh, I'm happy to hear that. I have a decently broad musical background, but I had never put much time into learning drums. Like I knew the very basics of it. I knew like where the snare may go, where the kick may go. Uh, Beyond that, I really hadn't studied it, and I'd say that that's been the kind of the grounds that I've covered the most in the last I don't know 9 or 10 months of practicing music, and a lot of that I owe to my really good friend Ryan, who's the back of beyond.bandcamp.com, and Reed knows him as well, but he's spent a ton of time teaching me about drums and rhythm and how to do it, and helping me apply it to my music. And I think that every song is so much stronger because of learning a little bit more about drums and rhythm like that.
Yeah, for sure. You can definitely really hear it, and like having listened to Ryan's music too, like it's almost like I can hear like a little part of him in the songs, which is nice.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, I guess pulling off of that question about the podcast, and you can answer this whether it's like DS artists or non-DS artists, people who are on the podcast or not. But this album feels very, yeah, I would say different from the first album. A lot more like cohesive and conceptual. Did you have any particular musical influences for this album that you'd like to maybe highlight?
Yeah, I'm sure I do. I would say probably the biggest influence is E-Rang. Upon making the first album, I was listening to E-Rang a good bit, but I really, I don't know, just binged through his discography in the last, 8 or so months that I was making this album. And I feel like I don't know, he's a pillar in the community. Anytime I'm insecure about something with my own music, I find strength in what E-Rang's put out, and I just appreciate the way that he approaches music in such a natural way. It feels like while you're getting music that fits within the genre, it's him. He's pouring himself into the music, and he is Dungeon Synth. So no matter what he does, it sounds like Dungeon Synth. And this idea of making music in that way is very inspiring, and he's just so talented that it has a huge influence on me. Maybe kind of in some other, like a little less in the in the foreground of my mind. Would definitely say Godspeed You Black Emperor as a big influence on this album, and think in general in my affinity for playing with texture and uh, some of the like more atonal qualities of things that you can appreciate in music. And down a similar path, Phil Elverum, who does the microphones in Mount Erie, while that doesn't really sound anything like my music, that attention to minute differences in texture and what elements like that can introduce into music really just really affects me.
That makes a lot of sense. I think hearing you say Godspeed You Black Emperor makes me really happy. I know in the past, I had mentioned after listening to the first Cursebitten record that, your style to an extent reminds me of just the way they pace their music. And yeah, when I heard those really big, gritty, distorted choirs and the hissing, really textural tone of the violins and how they're layered with delay and all that, like my first listen to that album, I got really strong Godspeed vibes, and so
Oh,
yeah, that makes a lot of
wonderful.
sense.
That's high praise.
Absolutely, one of my favorite projects of all time. So yeah, it
Oh,
couldn't be higher praise.
wonderful.
While we're talking a bit about kind of influences, and you also brought up your music background a bit earlier, I wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit about that, like kind of how you got into music and then how you specifically got into Dungeon Synth.
Yeah, that sounds like fun. I don't know how detailed I should be. I might as well go a little long form with it.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, everyone's into music when they're young, and I thought that girls would like me if I learned to play guitar. So I tried learning guitar. It was very bad for a while through high school. Got a little slick with it, and started like a very casual band with some of my friends. With Ryan, the Back of Beyond, he was in it, and Ryan is a very strong musician and kind of started teaching me about music theory. So while uh, everyone was struggling with parts of the band, after every practice, I would learn a bit of music theory and then some technique and stuff like that from Ryan. And that kind of something about my weird little brain loves music theory, and that really set off a spark of learning that on my own independently. So any technical skill with music kind of came about from ways of experimenting with theory. So I did that for a while, and I did ended up getting a little slicker with guitar and started playing in some cover bands for a while throughout like the very end of high school and through college, and that was fun. That it was very I don't know. It's a special type of satisfying to play in cover bands, especially if you're kind of detached from the music that they're making, and it forces you to be around very strong musicians for many hours a week, and that kind of built up a lot of my general musical chops, I guess you could say. And then I hinted at it at the podcast before, but I think when I was 19 or so, I joined an emo band and I played guitar in the emo band, and that was absolutely when I peaked as a person. And I rode that out for a couple years. Yeah, and then just kind of took music, just took it on my own. I kind of did the singer songwriter thing for a while. I still do the singer songwriter thing to an extent and enjoy it, but yeah, just this past, I want to say March or April, I decided to get like a much stronger PC to record songs that I had written, and I wanted to get into virtual instruments. And at the time, I'd been playing a ton of Dungeons and Dragons, and I had already totally lost my heart in Dark Souls, and was getting introduced through Reed into this dungeon synth, and I kind of had this idea of, hey, let's download a bunch of virtual instruments and then just make a dungeon synth song to have fun and to try to learn how to use virtual instruments. And I ended up doing that a couple times, and really was falling in love with the genre of dungeon synth by listening to it critically to learn how to make it. That was where it really caught me. Uh, so yeah, I did that for a while, making songs and kind of getting stronger with the technical computer skills. And somewhere along the way, I was spending a drastically disproportionate amount of time on the dungeon synth and less on recording songwriter things. And to me, it's so much more fulfilling and so much more exciting than what I was doing before, doing the acoustic thing. And yeah, just from there, won over my heart, and I spend all of my free time now doing that.
Yeah, it's definitely been awesome to kind of see you go through that process. I remember when you first sent us Augur of Darkness to listen to, and I was like,
Yeah.
oh, wow, he actually did it. He made Dungeon Synth.
That was a big day. This is, I don't even know if the fans can handle this, but I'll say it. The very first Dungeon Synth song that I made, it's currently on Seize It, and it's that's Behold the Final Light, but that's kind of a remake of it because I made so many mistakes in the first project file. It made more sense to scrap it. But in the original, over the music of Behold the Final Light, I was reading R.A. Salvatore, doing a little
Oh, I
spoken
remember
word bit
that. I
with
remember
way too
that.
much reverb over my voice, just going off about the Underdark and Drizzt.
I remember that. That ruled. I didn't
Yeah,
realize that
if I
that
had been
song
better at
actually.
reverb.
I didn't realize that
Yeah,
became
that's
Behold
what
the
it
Final Light.
was.
That's so wild.
Yeah,
That's
so
some
there's
deep
a
lore.
reality where Cursebitten could have been a spoken word Forgotten Realms project, and instead it's whatever it is now.
That's incredible.
It's I wonder what the proportion of dungeon synth artists is that got into making dungeon synth in that way. I find that really interesting because I mean I had a similar experience. I was making metal and discovered dungeon synth, started getting really into it, and I was like, well, I want to have more synth on my next metal album, so maybe I'll try and make a dungeon synth album just to learn that better. And in the process, became a dungeon synth artist, and I'm putting metal on the back burner for now.
I
Yeah,
think
very
part
cool.
of the situation there is it's like a siren on the shore. Like it lulls you in. Like you can take it as seriously as you want. You can put it. You could approach it completely casually if you'd like. But then once you're in it, you don't want to approach it casually. And our friend Tony was talking about it the other day as well. I think you think that it's going to be just a casual, quick little thing, not too many tracks, not too much time, and the actual depth that's available within the genre is so exciting and so enticing that you can really just get swept away and get lost in it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I like that allegory of the siren's call.
Siren's Call. That's
Look at
Dungeon
this.
Synth.
Yeah, look at this fun land of imagination and adventure where you don't have to
Right.
take it too seriously. It's
Yeah.
just a fantasy stylized genre, and then you get into it and really start
And
making
you're lost.
cohesive and
You're
yeah
lost.
conceptual things. You're lost forever in the
Yup.
realms of dungeon synth. So kind of to dovetail on that, um, like we've been saying quite a bit here during this podcast episode, that the new album feels very cohesive and intentional. Would you call it a concept album? I feel like I got strong wintry vibes from it, and I also wonder, like, would you consider it to be a winter synth release? I don't know if it sounds stereotypically winter synth to me, but yeah, I just kind of want to get your take on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it'd be fair to say it's a concept album, although it depends on how pure you are about it, because it's kind of a couple general concepts that are feeding into the whole thing. And kind of to answer both, one of the main concepts is about how intense winter can be. And I love winter. I moved from a very hot place to a very cold place, and I love it. It's my favorite time of the year. And despite how much I like it, it's very like it can be. The goods and the bads are very extreme with it, and there's almost like I don't know, when you see something very powerful within nature and it's beautiful but intimidating. I see that with winter,
Awe, right?
right? Awe, yeah. There's a lot of awe, and I imagine that for like the term winter synth, outside of winter, there's probably its own stylistic connotations, and I don't know if I would strictly fall within those, but it's definitely synthy virtual music inspired by winter. If you call that winter synth, maybe you would. It would fit right at home there. As far as the other heavier concepts, uh, it's partially it's about myself in a lot of ways. With this combination of living in winter and the intensity of winter, and maybe in a bigger picture, the ideas of the cycles of nature kind of forcing cycles onto people. I feel like I'm a character that can relate to all of the more general titles. And if the overall title of the album is Northwarder, which there's very little actual lore behind it, but it's a type of person in Dark Souls 2 in that universe. Uh, they're sort of like a resource in battle, and it's a very esteemed position. And part of the way that you get there is, as they say, a great journey of great hardship. And I love that because great hardship doesn't necessarily have to be something bad or negative. It can be something intense that makes you grow and makes you improve and come out stronger. And I see that for winter, and I see that for my own life. I see that for my approach to music. I feel like I don't know, it kind of ties in together to all of these other concepts that I'm tackling here. And so, while maybe you could imagine like a stereotypical, just the main character going through a big fantasy journey, you can also imagine Trev doing his thing, letting nature influence him, living in winter, going through great hardships, and trying to come out stronger for it.
I love that. I think
Yeah.
that's an incredible way to think about it. And all the best quests are the really difficult ones that you only manage to scrape by the skin of your teeth.
Absolutely.
So yeah,
Yeah.
great philosophy there.
The and you spoke a lot about cycles, and Tristan brought up winter, but there's like a lot of reference in the song titles to like the changing of seasons, as well as like harvest. And I know that's probably somewhat influenced by your work, which I don't
Yeah.
know that you've ever talked about on the cast
No,
about
I
what
don't
you
think I
do.
have.
How has well, tell us a little bit about what you do, and I would like to know how that's like influenced your music, if at all.
Yes, and so that kind of comes as a further elaboration of myself being a character, an unlikely character of the story that the album may be telling, at least in part. I'm in grad school. I'm a fourth year PhD student, and I study horticulture and research potatoes. And part of my specialty is like field research. It's growing potatoes. So every spring through early fall, I'm tending to my crop. I'm doing research. I'm taking data, and I'm growing a big old field of potatoes. And part of the genesis of the very early stages of the concepts that became this album, I had just recently finished The Harvest, or maybe I was about to finish The Harvest, which is such a difficult, intense time of the year for me. There's many long days back to back, like very, very long, rigorous days. And I was talking to friends. I was talking to Reed and to our fiance Devin, and I just offhandedly said something like, we just finished The Harvest. My life is going to be so much easier. I'm so happy to be done. And Devin mentioned that I sounded like the local village boy. And it's so true. It's despite being a 21st century Trev, I feel like all of the sentiments that I was feeling could easily be felt by some fella in a feudal system in a fantasy world somewhere. And I don't know. I think that kind of fits the idea of on the surface, you see the track titles and you listen to the music, and it may be about some big, powerful fantasy landscape, and it is. But then it could also just be about me living in Wisconsin and working on potatoes, and both ring true. Despite the way the world develops, some things just really don't change that way. And one of those things that doesn't change is the way that kind of the power of nature can impact, as I've said, the cycles that humans are in. Ideally, we wouldn't be working a ton to harvest food to live off of that food, and but we do, because that's what we have to do. We can't grow food all year, especially with somewhere with such an aggressive winter like where I live. And yeah, a bit of a tangent there, but everything kind of ties together like that, and I can really relate heavily to the way that things get influenced there. And maybe one step further, you mentioned that the songs kind of reference changing of seasons, and more particularly, I think that this album is about the end of fall into the beginning of winter, and then the growing intensity of winter, kind of culminating in the last track, which I titled "The Coldest Day of the Year." And
That last track
yeah,
is so good.
thank you. I'm happy to hear. But I guess the ideas there, kind of going with the theme of subverting the expectation of it being about either a great hero or maybe myself, a potato farmer. I think that at first you would see that and think this growing intensity of winter is bad, and it's something to be afraid of, and things are getting worse. But it's never really outright said for that to be true. That's not necessarily the case for me. I love the coldest day of the year. I love as fall ends and it gets colder and snowier, and the days are shorter and everything's slippery and it hurts to breathe. The air hurts your nose and your face, and it's so exciting to me. So I think that kind of subverting what you would expect there is like a key part of the winter elements of the album.
Yeah, I think you definitely captured that. A lot of the songs do have this kind of like swell to them, especially towards the end of the album, that like they come out of this like low, eerie kind of coldness into this kind of swell of awe that I think really captures kind of
I'm
those things
happy to
that you
hear
just
that.
described. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really great and refreshing to hear someone who has the extremely unpopular opinion of loving winter as much as I do. I too am really big on winter, and I think it kind of shines through in some way where, there's a lot of, on this album, very uncomfy vibes where, maybe like just track titles like "The Windows Are Shut and the Fields Are Bare," and you have
Right.
hissing and harsh violins. But throughout all of that too, you have some times of like really, I feel like just special like warmth and comfiness and like almost comfy synth elements that are coming through with some really fuzzy pianos, and I feel like those are made all the brighter and warmer by the harsh atmosphere, which is something I really appreciate about winter. Just that it's easier to feel cozy when it's raging blizzard outside or whatever. And I think that's
I'm so happy to hear that you took that away.
Yeah, some of the tracks do, I agree, really feel like you've just come out of the blizzard and you're like in a warm tavern, like warming up.
Yeah. Last winter, I read Moby Dick by Herman Melville, and he has a passage in there kind of talking about how you can't feel true comfort just alone, that true comfort comes from escaping discomfort. And yeah, he claims that the most comfortable a person could be is when it's very cold and then they're under a warm blanket. And that luxury is something that, in his opinion, the wealthy rob themselves of by having furnaces keeping the room warm. And that's something that really resonates with me. And I think that, it just makes me very happy that you point out kind of the contrast there, because you need the harsh, gritty sounds. You need the harshness of winter to really appreciate the lighter stuff. And I have a song, "A Cold, Dark, and Very Gentle Place" is not in full-on stark contrast, because there's some uneasiness there, but it's almost like finding refuge there. And I think that while that track is a little stripped down compared to others, it feels very special to me, kind of maybe for the same reasons.
That's lovely. And piggybacking off of that, you mentioned reading Moby Dick. I know that you are a big reader. How much does that influence your music, or do you kind of draw inspiration from what you read, or are they kind of two separate things?
It's It's kind of difficult for me to say. I do draw from reading more than any other media. Well, no, maybe not Dark Souls. Maybe Dark Souls takes the cake. But I don't know, especially in like more background subconscious ways. I think like things like Cormac McCarthy, some of the intensity that he gets in his writing really influences for me. But this is something that Ryan and I have talked about a lot. For me, I almost I don't approach music being influenced the way that a lot of people do, especially within the genre. I feel like when I start writing something, I have a musical idea that I want to execute, and maybe I have some emotional feelings that I want to bring up, but it's very rare that I write a musical piece that I intend to be about some sort of existing media or something.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
remember you talking about that, I think, in the Feriador episode.
yeah, because I totally remember that. Yeah, and maybe that's a weakness or maybe just a difference, but for me, I'm much more likely to execute music ideas and then tie it back to something existing or something that I feel like uh, evocative that kind of fits the musical ideas, and then maybe I polish up the song to kind of reflect on whatever inspirational context I've chosen. I think I'm a
Yeah.
little weird there, but it's the way it goes.
Everybody has their own like creative process. It's neat.
You mentioned here that you kind of start with an idea or a feel and try to shoot for that musically. Maybe not necessarily a specific like piece of media you're trying to represent. And you also mentioned having a big I guess a great love for music theory. I'm curious, for this album, were there any like bits of music theory that you used as like a toolkit to try and deconstruct the feeling you had for the concept of the album? Like any really often employed or favorite techniques?
I wouldn't say that there's like music theory ideas that I associated with the themes of the album. That I employed those ideas just to get that association, but there were maybe you can call it like a theory motif that will come around. And then there were also just music theory ideas that I was a little weaker with my last album, and I made much more of a conscious effort to execute here. Things like having repeating, I guess you could say, like repeating melodic motifs throughout songs in subtle ways that maybe carry across the album. That's something that I really hadn't taken the care to execute before, and wanted to find that throughout this. And maybe you could like posthumously argue that that fits the cohesiveness of the songs and the conceptual tightness. But I don't know if I was thinking that as I did it. It was more a thing that I found neat and wanted to experiment with. And in general ways, I tried to be more intentional about harmonizing my lead melodies. Tried to be much more intentional about developing lead melodies. In the past, with the first Cursebitten album, it wouldn't be like, I think there's some parts where I would just copy paste a melody from one verse-ish section to another, and I would never do that now. I would have some sort of melodic development there. But yeah, kind of like I said, I don't think that I was choosing these theory ideas to reflect the concept of the album. Just more, those were part of the toolkit that I was bringing to the table when I made it. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes a lot of sense to me.
I know, like, you can't pick a favorite kid, but do you have a favorite track off of the new album? Is it possible to choose?
I think that the title track Northwarder is very special to me. It feels like even though I've said that the tracks on this album are a step up from on the first album, I think that this track is a step up from the others. And part of that is because Ryan wrote the drums for them, so the drums are far more developed than anything I would have done. But I think from a lot of perspectives, it's like in a technical sense, a lot of my best work. If that's not vain to say, I hope. And then probably just recency bias, but the song "The Howling Wind" is, to me, I think that during writing this album, I got a sense for subtleties that I hadn't had before, and like towards the end of writing this album, so that some levels of subtlety that are missing from other tracks are found in that one, and sort of attention to detail that isn't always present at that high level. That song makes me very excited about music, although it's a little less typical in a lot of senses from my other songs. But also, I've listened to the other songs like 1,000 times, and I wrote that one a few days before I submitted the album to distribution. So that could totally play a role in why that one feels exciting.
For sure. I remember, and I think Northwarder is one that went through quite a few iterations before you kind of landed on the final sound for it. Correct me if I'm wrong there, but I think I remember hearing you send like a few versions of that, and it's been cool to watch its development, and I think it landed in a really great place.
I'm glad to hear that. I think that, to me, that's an important part of writing strong songs, and I'm sure that there's plenty of cases where that's not necessarily true, but I always write something that sounds far from a finished song, but there's an idea there, and then I'm the type of musician to come back and add and tweak and change and go through many iterations. And I think that you need to go through that like dying and rebirth process over and over again to come out with the song that's reached maybe not fair to say the most potential of the song, but the most potential that the songwriter could have. To the term that I always use is Trev's best effort, because you can always add stuff to make songs better, but there's a point where I feel like with everything that I can do with music, this is my genuine best effort. And there's a lot of points where I feel like I'm done, and then I step back and think, that's not Trev's best effort. There's a little more juice I could give. And I think going through that process of closing it, coming back and editing, closing it, coming back and editing is needed for achieving everything that I could do with a piece of music.
For sure. I understand that even like in visual art, like I'll do something and I'll like finish and I'll be like, and then I'll like step away for a few hours and come back and be like, okay, I know where to go with this now.
Absolutely. And we've been through that so much, where you've sent me the final, in quotes, version of the piece many times, and then final 2, final 3, etc.
Yeah.
And then they're always stronger for it.
You can see how many times things are titled final on my desktop files.
Right.
It's like, it'll, like the one that I'll actually send you at the end will be like final, actual final, small.
Trust me, I promise it's the last one.
Yeah.
I think that that's an important part of the process, and maybe in a general sense, that's a sign of putting a lot of care into something.
Yeah.
So one thing you kind of mentioned there, and that we've talked about a bit before during the episode, is just like the subtlety that you're kind of going for, and developing your melodies and things like that. And a lot of that I've heard on this album specifically is kind of textural. And it sounds like you did a lot of development and building texture from the first album to this album. And I'm sure you're with your iterations that you were doing were changing and layering textures. And so I'm kind of curious about maybe some of the tools you were using to build those textures. As someone whose music is very bold and in your face and like, here's a melody, and I don't do maybe as much of the texture or the atmosphere, I'm very jealous of how you build up your soundscapes. And so I was wondering if you had any like VSTs or instruments that you're using that maybe samples or whatever it is that you think stand out. And if it's a secret, feel free to not tell me, but curious if you're willing.
No secrets here. And the music is so wonderful. It's got everything it needs. There's nothing to change. But as far as how I get how I kind of develop texture in general and a little more here. I think that I was more open to combining different VSTs and plugins. That played a bigger role, whereas before I was so overwhelmed, there's so many options. I was much more likely to like a VST that I really love and I've talked about a lot is Spitfire Labs. It's like a suite of free, very well sampled sounds, but they're also very distinct. They have a lot of the effects baked in, and I would crank those effects. And this time I would try to keep the original tone if I was using Labs or from any other VST, a little drier maybe, and then mix different elements over it. So creating some sort of distortion through a plugin, and then maybe adding reverb, changing the order that the plugins are going, kind of like with guitar pedals, just changing the chain there. I would say that combination is important. I also would say becoming more comfortable of automation within your workstation. I use Reaper, but you can use it anywhere. Automation seems weird and scary at first, and it's just a little. If you don't know how to do it, it feels like a technical burden. But I have a lot of automation set so that the values of different sliders on VSTs or on effects on VSTs are changing throughout the song. Maybe like the gain is increasing and decreasing uh, automatically throughout the song as if I were turning the knob, but it's set into the system there. And a lot of times, interesting texture and texture that stands out comes from changes within it. So, like if I have a big voice dominating a lot of space in the mix, and the distortion knob is going, getting more intense than pulling back, then that you don't just get hit with the wall of distortion. You get hit with like changing amounts of the overtones and undertones that make up that distortion, and that's much more pure and much more interesting and nuanced to me, I guess.
Yeah, I definitely, as a listener, I think one of the best things that happens in this album is like this building of suspense that happens in a lot of the tracks. I think in the first track, and then the most recent one you did,
Mm-hmm.
the kind of vocals you put in there and the strings really build that suspense well.
Oh, that's nice to hear. I think one other thing that comes to mind there, getting away from writing music on a grid kind of system. Ultimately, it's always going to be on a grid system, but having maybe it's difficult to put into words, but having music not sound like it's very subdivided everywhere is important to getting kind of like on an overall song base, having things lead into each other smoothly so that the texture doesn't sound as blocky when it's introduced. I remember Reed and I have a close friend that's this very talented musician. And they were listening to a song and mentioned that, oh, it's a good song, but it sounds like it was written in a workstation. And that's something that resonates with me, where it's so easy when you're looking at it visually in your workstation to be, on this measure, the verse ends and the chorus begins. So you put the new instruments on that measure as things change. It's much smoother to have elements being introduced kind of staggered. And I think for getting a good textural mix, something like soupy and nuanced and interesting, it's really important to take advantage of that. And if you listen to like Godspeed You or Phil Elverum, there's a ton of that going on. There's not new stark sections. There's things swelling in at different times so that you find yourself in an A section and then eventually you're in a B section without as hard of a change. And some of that comes from, as much as I've said I'm guilty of quantizing my notes, of like fixing them mechanically, it comes from getting away from that sometimes. It comes from having things just not start and stop on such hard edges based on the measures and the different sections, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's like one of my favorite things when I'm listening to music or something I look for and the music I listen to is like how artists build that wall of sound, like
Right.
especially when
Yeah.
it's done gradually. And I'm trying to remember if it was just Devin or if it was you as well who used to listen to like a lot of shoegaze.
Yeah, for sure. Devin more so than me, but both of us were really into it for a time.
Yeah, and so I sometimes get like little tiny notes of that when I like hear a Cursebitten thing, and just with how you're building that sound.
Yeah, there's a lot of wonderful lessons in textural music and experimental music to be found in shoegaze, and that's important. It's almost like a good diet for a musician.
So I guess this is a bit of a non sequitur, but I was wondering if you maybe wanted to explain the album cover a little bit, and I guess this could be a question to both you and Reed here,
Yeah.
just since you both are very involved in this album cover.
Yeah, so Reed drew the artwork, Grackdraws on Instagram. Reed did the artwork in the Northwarder cover art, and then I did the little bits of graphic design around it. I think the best way to do it would be to explain how it came about, and maybe Reed can help me fill in the blanks.
Yeah, for
For
sure.
me, kind of that long tangent that I went on about 20 minutes ago about who knows what, something nuts about seasons and Trev and hardship and natural cycles affecting human cycles. I similarly let all that spill out to Reed, and Reed is just such a talented artist that it's very special to me. It's very important that I can just trust her to go, and I know that I'm going to like whatever comes out. So I can spill all of that and then say, hey, Reed, can you take that and run with it? And she came up with this, and it's amazing. Maybe you can talk about what happened in the in-between there.
Well, thank you, first off. And likewise, it's really fun to be able to work with you to like, I've done a few of your single art covers before as well, and the podcast cover. But you always give me such kind of creative freedom, but also enough ideas to go off to, have something to work with. You gave me that kind of like the spark notes of what you talked about earlier over Discord. And we're like, hey, like, what should we do with this? And I remember we got in a like Discord call, and I like streamed to you a few early like concept ideas for the album, and we went through a few iterations. But I remember us both really wanting to include a field as like kind of an allusion back to the beginnings of the album. And then you were talking about cycles, and I was thinking like, oh, like what are some ways that we could represent that? And a lot of my own artwork that I do in my personal time has a kind of theme of contrast. So I definitely wanted to include like life and death. So you've got kind of the mostly fallow field, with a little bit of plants in it, but also the skull at the foreground. And then you kind of have that, the lunar cycle as well.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of playing into both of those things.
Yeah, it fits the concepts of the album very tight, very concisely. And then also to get a little bit into the technical side of it, I wanted to give you free reign, so I just kind of said the things that I like the most when you make album art or just artwork in general, and stuff that I would like to be present in. An important technical aspect of the artwork that I really like is similarly your use of different textures meshing together. So you've got kind of like a watercolory sky and then some chunky colors in some places, but then what seems like maybe pen lines in others, and then that big chunky gold pen that you use for detail. And the fact that it's not all one ubiquitous texture there is really appealing to me. For whatever reason, that's such an exciting art style, and I wanted to make sure that was present in the cover there, and Reed did a wonderful job.
Yeah, and thanks. It's one of my favorite things about art too, I think, and I talked about this a bit on my episode of the podcast, but I took like a really influential mixed media class that kind of, it felt like it broke down all the barriers for me, because I was like, oh, you can use multiple things in one art piece to have different textures.
That's in the rules?
That's I'm allowed to do that.
That's
And so that's
wonderful.
definitely been kind of a big thing that I took forward and love doing with covers especially.
All right. Well, I don't have too many other questions here. I love that discussion of the artistic development of the cover, though. I think it fits just the album itself super well. And looking at it and listening to the album, I felt like it just made sense based on the titles and the wintry vibes and what's going on. It made sense. So it's cool to hear the intentionality behind that and how it kind of dovetails into the design of the album too. Reed, was there anything else you want to go for here? Anything else you want to ask?
Yeah, I had a couple questions, less so about the album, but more so about the podcast still left.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you how you go about getting guests onto the podcast. You have 2 previous guests here with you, so I wanted to ask you about that. Like, what does that look like?
There's a lot of different ways that it happens. Some of them I'm not sure how to get into. A lot of times I'll maybe most frequently I'll send an email. If I'm reaching out and we haven't talked before, it's generally over an email. But a lot of times it's nice to talk to people that you have a bit of a friendly rapport with. Plenty of people since I made the Cursebitten Instagram, which has kind of been a wild ride. I'm not really a social media guy, but a lot of people will reach out and talk to me, or sometimes I'll reach out and talk to them about their release. And that kind of culminates in like hey, if you're a podcast person, you want to do the podcast? I would say lately that might be the way I've gotten the majority of guests on here. And then every now and then I'll have someone reach out to me out of the blue, and that might make things work out. I don't know. I guess it's tough to say if there's a consistent way. I think most commonly lately I'll have some sort of rapport with someone and then I'll start it out. But sometimes I'll really love someone's music and just reach out. At first it was a little scary when I had no like reputation or anything.
No Dungeon Synth clout.
Yeah, no clout, I suppose. I was just emailing people out of the blue. And it's funny, the only 2 no's that I got were, and I don't want to say who they were, but they were the first 2 people that I asked. And
Oh, no.
I remember telling Reed, like, so, somehow the people making fantasy computer music don't want to come talk to a stranger for an hour. This is a failure. But it was just those first 2. And to be fair, they had very reasonable reasons for saying no, and they were as kind as could be about it. But there were still no's, and it was very discouraging. And then since then, it's been nothing but yeses, which is lovely. It's very nice.
Yeah, I remember those conversations. And but you have definitely gotten quite a few really great guests on, and it's always a joy to listen to the cast.
That's so kind. I'm happy to hear.
And then the other thing I wanted to ask you about, I think, and I'm running kind of low on my list too as we reach almost the hour mark. What are some things that you really look for when you're trying to find new dungeons to listen to? Or like, what do you find are like pieces of music that kind of like draw you in?
That's a good question. I think that, especially within the genre, things that stand out to me, I would say, I know I've said this word like 100 times, but clever use of texture is really nice. But it can't always be that alone. I don't listen to a lot of like fully ambient music because I also like melodic and rhythmic ideas. I think that clever like instrumentation and arrangement is really important to me, as well as being rhythmically interesting within that. So even if there's like the E-Ring song, I believe it's called Night of the Troll. That one, it only starts out with a couple voices, but they're so rhythmically interlocked and interesting that I listen to it, and that's what I want to hear out of music, and it really grabs me. And then I'm not too particular about it, but having it doesn't need to be clean, but having some sort of I don't know, good just good mix, like a good well mixed and well mastered music definitely goes a long way. If it's very like robust use of the frequencies and things are interesting, and even if it's lo-fi music, if it's like that doesn't mean I won't like it, but something intentionally lo-fi that's still it's gritty but it fills up the space. I don't know, that's something that does a lot for me. Well produced music, I guess. Maybe
That
that's a
makes
little
sense.
vague, I don't know.
No, like having listened to like a lot of different types of music in the genre, because Dungeon Synth is a very wide genre. I feel
Right,
like
right.
so yeah, the things that you talked about definitely piece out, I think, a lot of things that I look for when I listen to Dungeon Synth as well, just because there is such a wealth of it, which is great. I think there's a lot to be found for
Yeah, there's so
everybody
many
in the
gems out
genre.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a wide range of what you can see, which is great. It's nice.
Yeah. And I think, like, as far as question wise, that's what I got. Did there anything that you wanted to kind of talk about the cast or the album?
No, I think that you guys did such a spectacular job here, really just getting all the juice out of me. It's been super fun. I feel like I got to ramble exactly as much as I wanted to ramble, which is nice.
Perfect. Well, closing question here then is, this album, I foresee it being an instant classic in the genre. I'm very excited about the whole release of it. Is there anything related to the album that you want to plug? And can you give us any juicy details about maybe physical releases or anything like that that's going into this album?
Ooh, okay, yeah. I do have some pretty juicy details. So as far as things to plug, by the time this is out, I think I'm gonna put it out the day the album comes out. So just listen to the dang album, I suppose. It's gonna be everywhere. I'll have it on Bandcamp and YouTube, but also the streaming sites, Spotify and Apple Music and all that. Uh, I also another thing to plug. So last week, I guess a week before the album came out, I put out a single from the album, and I put a YouTube video out. I don't know, yesterday for us, but a few days prior to when people listen to this, where I kind of just comb through the mix and explain my decision making there. I have a ton of fun making those videos. The YouTube algorithm's kind of been liking them lately, so if you want to check that out, that's on the Cursebitten YouTube. That's really all there is to plug now. As far as some physical stuff, there's going to be t-shirts. They haven't arrived yet, although at the time of releasing this, they might have arrived. And I'm very excited. They're very cool. And I think I'm going to sell them fairly cheap. I made them. My mom and I made them while I was visiting over Christmas, and with this wonky t-shirt making setup that she has, and every one of them special. They look really good. So there's that. There's going to be t-shirts, and then I don't know how much I'm supposed to talk about it. I imagine that they're not too picky, but I've been talking to Sam from Orcus, who does Vicious Mockery Records, and they'll be doing a tape release of the album right now, planned for March. Although nothing. I don't know if anything's too committed yet, but that's the plan for now. And I don't know. That's going to be really exciting. I love Vicious Mockery. I respect them so much. They're just such a cool label, and I love their attitude and their ethic about everything. So I'm really happy to be found on them.
Yeah, that is incredible news. Super excited to pick up literally all of the things you've said here. I'd love to have another shirt, whether Castbitten or Cursebitten. I think that'll be awesome.
I'm wearing my Elyvilon shirt. I should have said that earlier, but yeah, I put it on
That's awesome.
for the interview.
Incredible. I love to hear it. Thank you.
And I'll plug for you, if I think fans of the cast already know, but there are podcast shirts as well as a tape release of your previous album, Seize It, are available for purchase as well.
It's true. Yeah. The rumors are true. But while we're at it, I don't know, Reed's got stickers, buy those. Tristan just had the big tape release of his album. Plenty of good stuff to get. I don't know, stuff to check out.
Yeah. I think as far as Dungeon Synth goes, we've got a huge collection of cool things we can pick up, and I think most of it lately is coming from Reed and Trev here. So great stuff.
Yeah, Reed is truly dominating the artwork scene. That's been very fun to watch.
Oh, shucks. Thanks.
All right. We're just buttering each other up at this point. This is gratuitous.
Yeah, not wrong. Well, yeah, Reed, do you want to wrap it up then?
Yeah, I don't have any special outro, but thank you, Trev, so much for having us both back on the cast and for letting us do this Uno reverse interview situation with you. I can say I definitely appreciate how difficult it is to write questions. So, yeah.
It's nice. It's nice to be on the other end, and thanks so much to you guys for doing this. It's fun. Yeah, the Uno reverse is fun. The two host is super fun, and I would be hard to trust anyone else more than you guys, so I'm super happy to have it.
Yeah, thank you, Trev. It's been a pleasure and an honor to be on here. So,
really appreciate it. All right, take care, everyone. Bye.
All right.
Take care.
See ya. Take care.
Sup, friends? What a fun time that was. Huge thanks to Tristan and to Reed for hopping on and throwing so many fun questions at me. They did a wonderful job and brought such a nice atmosphere to things. I really had a great time, and it feels great to air out so many ideas about the release that had just kind of been souping around in my head for so long. So I know we kind of did some casual plugs at the end of the episode, but I'm just going to reiterate everything here. Tristan makes music as Elyvilon. That's Elyvilon. I'm sure many of you are already familiar with his work, but if not, definitely want to listen to that. It's just incredible. It's an absolute gem within the genre and definitely worth checking out. So you can find their release at elyvilon.bandcamp.com, as well as on places like streaming services and YouTube. You can just search Elyvilon and it'll take you there. You can also keep up with them at Elyvilon_ on Instagram. And I know Dungeons Deep, they've recently put out tapes of Elyvilon's debut album, Nimwe's Gift, and I believe there's still some of those available if you'd like them. So definitely something worth checking out. You can see Reed's wonderful artwork at Grackdraws on Instagram. That's GrackDraws. And she's great. She does cover art as well as just a lot of great pieces on her own. And Reed also has stickers available at etsy.com/shop/Grackdraws. If you haven't listened to the new Cursebitten album, Northwarder, then maybe check that guy out. I worked very, very hard on it for a very long time, and I'm just so pleased with how it turned out. You can find it on cursebitten.bandcamp.com, as well as just by searching Cursebitten on sites like YouTube and Spotify and Apple Music, all of those places. I've got Northwarder shirts coming soon, more details on those later, as well as some eventual tapes, as the rumors say. All of my other stuff that I usually plug is still available as well. There's tapes for my first album, Seize It With Thine Own Hands. Those are available at uncomfyrecords.bandcamp.com. And there's still some Castbitten shirts available on cursebitten.bandcamp.com/merch. One last thing to plug. I put out a YouTube video recently. I kind of mentioned this at the end of this episode, but I'm breaking down the mix for a song off of the new album, and I spend about 45 minutes going through the Reaper project file for track 3, A Great Journey of Great Hardship, and just explaining my thought process and talking about music and just breaking things down. I love doing that kind of content. I love talking about music in depth, so maybe check that out if you'd like a more technical peek into how I make songs. That video is called How to Make Dungeon Synth Ep 2, and it's on the Cursebitten YouTube channel. Okay, tons of plugs this time. Cursebitten's selling out, baby. Thanks so much for listening, and maybe on a more serious note, the last few days of releasing this album has just been such a nice process, and it's been really great to see so many people reaching out and showing support, and it's been wonderful seeing so many of the friends that I've made from within the scene, so many wonderful artists just saying kind things to me, as well as fans that I'm not familiar with, just going out of their way to reach out and tell me what they think about the album. That's so incredibly nice and cool of them. So I guess just thanks so much to everyone that's made this such a special process. And then again, thanks so much to Elyvilon and to Grackdraws for doing this special episode and taking their time and doing such a good job with it. All right, everyone, that's all I've got. Thanks a ton. Take care. Get out of here.